be great. So now on to Ian. So thank you ever so much, Ian, for coming across. Ian's an ex-oil field executive who now lectures and writes about the geopolitical agendas being orchestrated across the globe. He's noted as having a drive to raise public awareness of the corporate agenda, who are aiming to capitalise key resources within our planet with the intention to globalise and harmonise the behaviour of humanity. And as sure of anybody who comes here, most of you will have looked into some of the subject matters, very interesting subjects that he covers. It's very wide-ranging. He's a prominent activist in many areas and has a key presence in the anti-fracking community, the anti-fracking movement, and he's also done a recent video which is well worth watching. Ian hosts a regular show called Insanity versus Insanity, where he speaks with really credible, articulate guests on a wide range of areas, so I would highly recommend that you go and check him out if you've not already done so. Earlier this year I had the wonderful opportunity with Catherine and Pippa to go down to AV6. Pippa was one of the speakers there, and we had a wonderful array of speakers. We had some people in the audience who went there as well. Some who've come here as a result of going there, like Andrea.
AV7, wasn't it?
AV7's the next one, isn't it?
I hope so.
Yeah, it was AV6, absolutely.
If AV7's gone, I've gone for a time loop.
Well, the dimensions are shifting apparently. So the title of tonight's talk is The Beginning is Now. And I suppose any of you are looking at maybe alternative stuff. There's a lot of talk on the internet, on social media, etc. about SHEMITAH. And Catherine thought it was a very appropriate thing for Ian to talk about tonight, because it's actually around this date right now that SHEMITAH is occurring. The blood moon is on Sunday. So Ian has very kindly agreed to do the talk. So can you please put your hands together and give a warm welcome to Ian. Thank you, Ian.
Thank you, Joe. Well, it's a pleasure to be back here. I think the last time that I was here was about 2 years ago, I think, give or take. And I think then I'd been in Hull earlier in 2013 on the Fractured Future tour, and there was a few people who saw that talk but thought that a few more needed to see it. So I came back here to this venue, and I must confess, when I first came into the venue and I walked through the front door there and I saw the size of the venue, I thought, holy shit. And they said, no, it's the right, it's the back room. Sigh of relief there. So it was an absolute pleasure to be back, but you know, this area has almost become like my second home over the last 18 months, because with the anti-fracking campaign, having been at Barton Moss through the winter of 2013 into 2014, and then having finished the Barton Moss campaign in Greater Manchester, we moved to Crawberry Hill. So I moved my caravan to Crawberry Hill, where it remained until East Riding Council decided to remove it. That was back in January, I think. And so I was commuting between Devon and Crawberry Hill. But of course it was all worthwhile because, you know, first of all there's some prominent members of the local anti-fracking community here, and Rathlin of course announced on the glorious 12th of August, they announced that they would not be returning to Crawberry Hill and would return that well site to its former glory. So, you know, that was a hell of a result. Unfortunately we still got to get rid of them at West Newton, but nonetheless that was a great result. So what has absolutely fascinated me though is the sort of demographics of the area, because while I was at Crawberry Hill, which is about 10 miles away from here, I met people who live in the Wolds that couldn't remember the last time they'd come to Hull. And I met people from Hull who were coming into the Wolds for the first time for as long as they could remember. So it's, how many people from the Wolds here tonight? I rest my case. And I guess if we did a similar event in Walkington or Beverley, there wouldn't be anybody from Hull. Anyways, wonderful to see you tonight. And when Catherine asked me to speak, and she offered me a couple of dates, and I said, well, you know, the 23rd of September works for me. And she said, okay, 23rd of September, what are you going to talk about? And I said, well, if I'm talking on the 23rd of September, it absolutely has to be the SHEMITAH. So, as you know, there's no other subject for that night. How many people know what the Shemitah is? Oh, about half a dozen. Okay. Well, basically, I'm going to tell you right from the get-go, it's fear porn. But nonetheless, that doesn't mean to say that there's not a significance to it. But, you know, I just want you to understand that I'm not going to come at this from an angle of creating the fear. There are those, of course, who would like you to do that. But how many people here are familiar with the film Monsters, Inc.? Anybody heard the film Monsters, Inc.?
Yeah.
God, if you haven't, I mean, it's a kids' film. Yeah. Well, you know, my youngest son is now 12, but I was very fortunate. My elder kids, who are now in their 30s, but my elder kids, you know, I never had the opportunity to really participate in their childhood because I was doing what I thought I had to do back then, which was chase the dollar. So I'm afraid that, you know, if you ask me to name any of their school teachers, I haven't got the first clue. But my youngest son, a little bit of a different situation. So for the first 6 years of his life, I was pretty much with him 24/7. And I was really glad I had the opportunity to do it a little bit differently than the first time round. But one of the benefits of that is you get to see these great films. And actually, if the film's crap, then you just fall asleep. So you get to catch up on sleep as well. But Monsters, Inc. is a wonderful film. So the plot, let me just... Yeah.
It's not scary, is it?
Not sure why this isn't working. Let's try that one more time. There we go. Monsters, Inc. We scare because we care. The basic plot, and I'm going to spoil it for anybody that hasn't seen it, but the basic plot is these monsters live in another dimension. And the power source for their dimension is the fear of children in this dimension. And it's the wardrobes or the closets in the kids' rooms that is the portal for the monsters to come through into this dimension, scare the crap out of the kids, make them and then they bottle it and take that back to their dimension, and obviously that gives them their power source. Well, there's a few of the monsters, a couple of them here, who are not very comfortable with this task of scaring kids. So they sort of go on a bit of a rebellion. And primarily because one of the kids actually comes back into their dimension, which is an absolute no-no. And so this little young girl becomes their friend. And so, of course, they really now are very uncomfortable about scaring other little girls just like their friend here. And then they stumble across something which changes the whole dynamic. Because what they discover is that actually they can get more power from laughter. But there's a problem. Because those who rule in the monsters dimension, represented by here and here, this guy is basically the ruler and she's the... this is like David Cameron.
Striking resemblance.
Well, what a pity there was no Prime Minister's questions today. I was going to see, you know, how Jeremy Corbyn could keep a straight face for half an hour without actually mentioning... Anyway, and so this is the David Cameron, and this is the George Osborne, if you like. And they know this. They know that they could get more power from laughter, but they suppress this knowledge, forcing the monsters to go and milk the fear. But then there's like a sort of revolution, if you like, and these guys are removed, and then the whole dynamic between the dimensions changes. So there's a dynamic that goes from one of fear to one of joy, one of laughter. And the film basically closes with the monsters, instead of sort of making the kids go, ah! With the monsters actually sitting on a stool telling the kids jokes and getting the kids to laugh so that they can then take it back. Well, a lot of these kids' films are very allegorical. And for anybody who studied the early works of Disney will know that there was a lot of allegory contained within the early Disney films. And this is what is really happening right now still with Hollywood. And there are films produced by, if you like, the puppets of those who think they're the rightful rulers of the planet, which are designed to keep us in fear. And then there are films put out by those who have an awareness of what's really going on, in many cases because of their close connection and relationship with the people who are producing the fear films. And they're putting out films that are allegorical in terms of, basically, look guys, we can't tell you in words of one syllable, you have to work it out for yourself, but this is the allegory, this is what's going on here. And I think that what's happening right now is that more and more people are starting to see through this charade. And 2012, December 21st, was a classic case of where the establishment were trying to build up a fear agenda of what was going to happen on 2012. Now, for those of you who've seen some of my presentations from 2008 and 2009, will know that my conjecture is that those who think they're the rightful rulers of the planet are actually running very scared of 2012. And that's why actually, there wasn't too much necessarily going on in terms of them pursuing their agenda or not accelerating it. But I gave a presentation in Liverpool in 2008 and I said that if they get beyond December 21st, 2012, and basically they're still here, then watch them accelerate their agenda, because they will believe that they have the opportunity to literally go for broke and take total control of this dominion. And that's pretty much what they're trying to do right now. And we're at a juncture right now where they believe they have an opportunity to further accelerate their agenda. So even the mainstream media have been running articles. The Daily Mirror run an article, the Daily Express run an article about the fear of what may or may not happen over the next few days. Well, there is no doubt that something big is coming. And what that is actually depends on each of us, both individually and collectively. They're trying to create the fear. They're trying to put everybody into a state of panic. So some of the things that have been presented about this Shemitah period, this next 5 days, will happen because they are, cosmic events, and we'll touch on some of those. But there's other stuff that they want to happen, they're trying to manipulate to happen. Whether it does happen depends on whether or not we fall for it, hook, line and sinker, or whether we say, you know what, fuck you. Guess what I'm going to be doing. And it's not always easy, because obviously, there is people who are just operating within the matrix, if you like. Then, they don't have the opportunity to discuss these issues on a wider basis. A lot of people just bottle it up inside, and so they're trying to almost suppress the fear. I think I've got the article from the Express. This is from the Express today, or yesterday rather. No, it's from today. Cruise ship asteroid on unclear orbit coming our way as doommongers say world could end. Oh my God! Well, hey, listen, who am I to say it will or won't happen? But apparently there is about 5 asteroids that are due to pass in cosmic terms relatively close to the Earth over the next few days. But this is the kind of stuff that's being put out there by the mainstream media. So, anybody else got any idea what else is scheduled to happen over the next few days?
Banking crash?
Well, a banking crash, well actually, and that would, we'll talk about that in a second. Pippa?
Is the CERN being ramped up?
Ah, CERN, absolutely. CERN is being ramped up. Actually, it was ramped up, I think, at 9:30 this morning. Because I saw somebody post on Facebook about this afternoon, and they said, are we still here? So CERN, yeah, anything else?
One of the things that they are trying to put out to give us more fear is this so-called new gonorrhea bug.
The new gonorrhea bug?
Yeah.
Okay?
Don't go there.
Check consoles.
Needless to say,
Yeah, right. Well,
if you catch it, you're a goner, yeah?
say again? Absolutely. Here we have Pope Francis addressing the Senate tomorrow. So, yes, the crash. Well, let's talk about the economic crash first. Yes, I mean, it shouldn't be any surprise to anyone that we're heading towards an absolute economic meltdown. And, I mean, basically, let me just give you almost my punchline, because I just want to make sure that everybody understands where I'm coming from here. My attitude is bring it on. Bring it on. Because the current paradigm ain't cutting it. I mean, it might sound a bit of an abstract question, but I can assure you I'll link it in. How many people here right now are proud to be British? Really proud to be British?
I am.
Really?
Yes.
What are you proud of?
The fact that I am an individual human being with more rights than some of the...
I didn't ask whether you were proud to be a sovereign individual, though.
Well, okay.
I asked whether you were proud to be British. But it's funny that, because I asked that question in Leeds, didn't I? On Saturday. How many people put their hands up in Leeds? None. None. Well, funnily enough, that seems to be pretty much the response, you know, right across the spectrum of talks that I've given around the country over the last sort of few months, maybe even longer. But the reality is that, you know, we're not proud to be British for a number of reasons, not least because of, you know, what Britain is involved in around the world. And it's happening because the collective we is allowing it to happen. I mean, that's the bottom line, you know? And we've got, I mean, we know all the reasons why we're allowing it to happen, or we're not doing enough to stop it, but that is the bottom line. It's happening because we, the collective we, are allowing it to happen. The crash. The SHEMITAH is basically a 7-year period. Now, it's not quite 7 years. It's actually 7 years minus 35 days. Because the SHEMITAH, the period, the yearly period, is 360 days, not 365. So for this 7-year, less 35-day period, as we go through history, there have been significant events at each of these junctures. And just going back a few years now, I have the wrong one. Let's go that one, that's even better. So we go back to 1973. We have the Middle East War, the Second Middle East War, and the oil shock crash. Well, it wasn't really a crash. It was actually the introduction of the US dollar as the global currency, and the manipulation by those who think they're the rightful rulers to increase the price of oil by 400%. How many people can remember back to 1973? Yeah? Okay, something happened. Actually, it was late 1973, early 1974. But can you remember what happened around about that time in terms of fuel?
Petrol rocketed.
Yeah, it rocketed, of course, but something happened. Rationing. Of course, it wasn't rationed, but everyone was issued, every registered keeper of a vehicle was issued with a ration book. So that in the event of rationing being introduced, you had ration coupons, and of course this was the first time ration coupons had been introduced since I think it was about 1956, wasn't it, or something like that, when the last rationing was ended after the Second World War. So this is some 17 years later, and ration coupons were issued. Well, let me tell you that actually ration coupons didn't need to be issued because there was no shortage of hydrocarbons. And what it was being blamed on was that because the US and the UK had supported Israel, of course, in that second Middle East war, that it was being presented as though the Arab nations were taking their revenge on the West by restricting the flow of oil, and increasing the price by 400%. Now, would you like to know the truth?
Yeah.
Okay, what actually happened was Henry Kissinger. Oh, and I had to smile on Sunday. In the Sunday Times, Henry Kissinger, being a Nazi hunter, made him a man of peace. Did you see that? Page 14 of the Sunday Times on Sunday. Kissinger, a man of peace. God damn.
Is there more than one like?
It must be more than one. So that's like calling Tony Blair a peace envoy. Oh, they did. But Kissinger, history has shown that it was Kissinger who deliberately brought about the Vietnam War. He manipulated the situation to bring about the Vietnam War. This man is no more a man of peace than Tony Blair. In the Middle East crisis of 1973, there was a game plan here, and the game plan had actually been implemented a few years earlier, or 2 years earlier in fact, on August 15th, 1971, when Richard Nixon, at the instruction of Henry Kissinger and James A. Baker III, took America off of the gold standard. They took the American dollar off of the gold standard. Up until that point, basically, an ounce of gold was $35. And in theory, any American could go into a bank and ask for an ounce of gold in return for $35. The dollar was backed by gold. From the 15th of August 1971, the dollar was taken off the gold, and the dollar was a floating currency, backed by nothing. So when the Middle East crisis occurred, Henry Kissinger went to Sheikh Yamani, or the Saudi oil minister, who was also the Secretary General of OPEC at the time. And he said, you know, look, we need to have a chat. He said, we've got an opportunity, and we've got a proposal to put to you here. What we would like you to do is increase the price of oil by 400%. And Sheikh Yamani went, what? And he went, yeah. He said, hear me out. But we want something in return. What we want you to do is we want you to demand that from this point forward, all oil is sold in US dollars. And Yamani thought about it and said, well, if you're sure, 400%, and in return we get the dollars. And he said, what do we do with the dollars? And he said, you spend them in America. This was the way in which they effectively created an economic boom in the US in the mid-70s, which lasted until a few years ago, because Saudi and all the other OPEC countries had this enormous amount of dollars to spend. Very few other places at the time wanted the dollars, but you could spend them in the US, you get anything you wanted. That's why when you go to Saudi, it looks like apart from the temperature and the dress, it looks like, any other American city. So Sheikh Yamani said, well, okay, I'll buy it, but I'm going to have to get the buy-in of the Shah of Iran. So he went to speak to the Shah of Iran and floated the idea. He said, well, look, maybe, we can take advantage of the fact that the Americans and the Brits have been supporting Israel, and we want to send them a message. So maybe we can just increase the price of oil. And the Shah said, well, that's a pretty good idea. Yeah, I'll go along with that. How much you got in mind? And Yamani said, well, about 400%. And the Shah went, no. He said, you can't do that. He said, the Americans will never agree to that. And Sheikh Yamani had to say, actually, it's their idea. It's their idea. So, to make it acceptable to the people of the West, a fake shortage was created. Tankers were held offshore all around this country to create a shortage so that people would have to queue at the pumps. And of course, psychologically, people then were blaming the Arabs. There was nothing you could do about it. There's no internet to sort of actually get to the bottom of the story here. So you just had to go along and accept the fact that the price of fuel at the time was, climbing extremely rapidly. So that was 1973. In 1980, this was a year after Maggie came into office, and we had a recession in the UK for, actually it ran right through, pretty much through the 80s. The massive stock market crash of 1987, the bond market crash of 94, the stock market crash and 9/11 on 2001, the global financial collapse in 2008, and now. Now, 4 years ago, I went over to Australia. This was the first time I'd been to Australia on a speaking tour. And basically, I went over there at the invitation of some Australian economists to talk about the coming collapse of the Australian economy. Because I'd spoken about this in the UK and in Ireland, and I'd said Australia, was basically being set up for a massive economic collapse. Well, these economists basically agreed with me, but they said, when we try and tell anyone, they're not listening to us. And I said, well, why is anyone going to listen to me? Because I'm not an economist either, but it's just my observation. And I went out there, and there were people who were going, I was explaining why this was going to happen. But of course, the establishment just went on the attack. And the thing is, Australia should be the wealthiest nation on the planet, because with all their resources that they have, it's become the world's mine, basically, but now it's pretty much all owned by China. And the level of Australian personal debt is the highest of any developed nation on the planet. The reason being is because just like in Ireland and Greece when they came into the euro, basically if you want money in Australia, yep, how much do you want? And it's just thrown at you. And of course what you're doing is you're creating the debt, the massive debt bubble. Properties, particularly in Western Australia, are outrageously priced because there's just so much money in the state. But it's now starting to burst because the prices of commodities, everything that's mined in Australia, are going down, and basically there's not enough income to service the debt. So there's a very good possibility, and if you watch what's happening in Australia, I think that Australia is going to be the first place to really tank. China might actually get in slightly ahead, but within terms of the Western nations, developed nations, Australia is going to be the first place to tank, and then it's going to follow very quickly here. So my counsel is pretty much the same as it's been for the last 7 years. The only thing you should have in the bank right now is an overdraft, and preferably big one. As big as you can possibly get. Because basically the banks are really in a world of hurt right now. And I think what we're about to see, that you may or may not know, but earlier this year the legislation was changed right across Europe. The legislation was originally scheduled to come into force next year, but it's been brought forward, and this gives the banks the power for a bail-in. Now you know what a bailout is, right? A bailout is where the banks say, we've run out of money. So what happens is the government says, and this is Iceland, the government says, how much do you need? And they say, X trillion. And then the government says, okay, we'll give it to you. But where does the government get it from? What the government does is it tells the Bank of England, a Rothschilds-controlled bank, it tells the Bank of England to effectively print the money. So it prints the money, takes the money, and then it distributes it to the banks, but the country has to pay the interest. So basically it's putting the nation into more and more debt. And George Osborne and David Cameron are very keen to say, that they've got the British debt under control. It's increasing. It's increased every year since they took office in 2010. We are very, very close to the point right now where the level of national debt is equal to 100% of our gross domestic product. In other words, it's almost equal to everything that this country earns in revenue in a year. And once you reach that point, it's almost a point of no return, because effectively the financial institutions own the country. So this is one of the things that we're certainly heading towards. But you know, the only time you have a problem with something like a massive collapse is one, if you have an attachment to what you've got in the bank. Well, I'm sure most people do, because in most cases you worked really hard for it. So right now, I mean, obviously we need working capital, you know, we need money to be able to live on a day-to-day basis. But if you have any kind of surplus, the last place it needs to be right now is in a bank. Because otherwise you may well find sometime in the next few weeks, months, that the banks say, actually, we need that money. Now in theory, I think there's a protection at 82,000 in this country. I think it's £82,000, but
They've just lowered it.
have you just lowered it?
Yeah.
75.
They pulled it back down to 75 because it went up. It started at 75, then they put it up to 85, then brought it down to 82, and now 75 again.
They're
Okay.
advertising heavily on the radio about it as well, which is
Yeah, they are.
saying, you know, your money's guaranteed. They're doing it a lot, which is a giveaway,
Pretty much.
isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. And of course that's what happened in Ireland 7 years ago. Oh, exactly 7 years ago. Almost to the day. It's actually September 28th, 2008. That was the day when the Prime Minister, the Taoiseach of Ireland, a guy called Brian Cowan back then, and his Chancellor, a guy called Brian Lenihan. Brian Lenihan subsequently died of cancer, and I believe that his illness was accelerated because he realised that he'd effectively stitched up the country. I don't think he realised quite what he had been forced into doing until it was too late. But basically, in September of 2008, Brian Cowan and Brian Lenihan were told to announce that the Irish government would underwrite the debts of all Irish banks. And the bankers just went, fuck yeah, casino time. And they basically destroyed Ireland's economy literally in the space of about less than a year. And of course, who comes in to take it over? You know, the corporations. And that's exactly what we're seeing here. So this is one aspect of it, the crash. So, I mean, I now pretty much live off grid, almost. I still have an outstanding bill with the company that was trying to drill at Crawberry Hill, because I, along with one or two others, we built a castle in front of the gate to stop them going in there. And when they eventually got an eviction order, you know, I put my name to it to resist it, along with a couple of other people, and they loaded the costs on us. But I said, well, good luck with that, guys, because I wouldn't have done it unless I had nothing to lose. So having got rid of pretty much everything, so that you know, you can challenge the corporations, because the corporations obviously rely on nobody having the courage, and I completely understand that, to challenge them, because why would you put at risk everything that you own, everything you've worked for? Why would you put at risk everything that you have to challenge the corporations when nobody in that corporation stands to lose anything? It doesn't matter whether you win, nobody, no individual in the corporation stands to lose anything. And this is how the corporations will bully. So I think that the world right now is in a very, very precarious financial position. And I think we might actually see in the next few days some announcements being made that may actually change the whole way in which global finance is constructed. Is anybody here familiar with is everybody familiar with the term BRICS? Yeah? Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa. They have effectively established an economy outside of the Rothschild banking system. Rothschilds don't like it, but it's got Russia's backing. And whereas the US maybe at one time, you know, was perceived to be the leading nation in the free world, now it's considered obviously to be a parasite. And we're not far behind, are we? So that's one aspect. Then something else that's about to kick off.
That's too scary.
What?
All that CERN business.
Well, is it? Is it?
I don't know.
Now, I completely understand this, and now this depends on your philosophy. So, I'm going to ask you to think about the question. And it's a bit of a, perhaps you might consider it to be a bit of a strange question. How many people here have an existential attachment to life? Well, by definition, of course, we all do. Because the fact that we are, or we perceive ourselves to be living, that is existence, and therefore we have an existential attachment to it. Okay. How many people are really quite relaxed about what happens once you leave this mortal coil? Yeah. And you know, I think more and more people are getting themselves into that headspace, because there's something occurring in terms of the wider consciousness that is encouraging people to reflect on whether or not this is all there is. So I'm assuming that everybody in the room accepts that there is something beyond this experience here. Would that be correct? Yeah. Great. Because that's exactly what the establishment don't want you to think, or don't want you to know. The establishment relies on you being scared shitless that this is all there is, and that you will do whatever it takes to stay here and to bow down to their dominion. Now, I don't know, I wasn't asking this question 10 years ago, but it certainly is very interesting to me that wherever I go in the world, an increasing number of people are taking the stance that, you know, this is just a piece of the journey. You know, we are here for approximately 28,000 days. Approximately. Obviously some more, some less. It's about 75 years, give or take. The first, almost half, arguably even more, is spent acclimatising. Certainly the early years. Because how many people here remember anything before, let's say, their 3rd birthday? Anything? Really? Oh, fantastic. What do you actually remember, Joe?
Being in the pram.
Being in your pram, okay. What do you remember, man?
Having my nappy change.
Having your nappy changed, right. Anybody, any other memories?
I can remember being in my cot looking out at my father and his friends smoking and wondering what the hell they were doing.
Well, it's very unusual for anybody to have any memories before their 3rd birthday. And as far as I can remember, my earliest memory was actually on my 4th birthday. So I was really a slow developer. My 4th birthday. But those early years are spent actually acclimatising to the physical realm. And if you have ever tried this with young children, when they first learn to speak, if you actually ask them what they were doing before they came here, some of the answers are really fascinating. You know, and sometimes they'll volunteer information, you know, about, we don't normally ask the question because we have the mindset that it wasn't until they were actually born that they would have any memory. But child prodigies is a classic example of you know, people souls who come here with skills or abilities that were inherent before they actually entered into this physical, empirical, material realm. So 28,000 days, we go through childhood, infancy, childhood, youth, young adulthood. And young adulthood is when, you know, we are procreating, we are hopefully enjoying family life, bringing children into the world, and obviously experiencing the way in which we are forced to exist in this 3-dimensional realm, i.e. we have to chase the dollar. Which, by the way, is getting a lot harder. When I saw the media attacking Jeremy Corbyn and said Jeremy Corbyn wants to take us back to the 1970s, I thought, yeah, the 1970s? when very few people had to work more than 8 hours a day. Everybody had full employment. You know, there were basically, I can remember, because this was the time that I first started to look for employment, and the total numbers of unemployed in the country was about 250,000. You know, when I graduated, the only decisions I had to make was how many job applications I could actually be asked to write, because I knew I was going to get an invitation to interview from pretty much all of them. So once I got the invitations to interview, the only decision I had to make then was how many I could actually be asked to go along to. And then I thought, well, you know, I'm going to get a job offer from maybe 1 in 3 or whatever. It actually was 1 in 2. So the only decision I had to make then was which one I was going to take. And I didn't have to work more than 40 hours. Neither did my father, who was a lift engineer, so working with the Greater London Council as it was at the time. So we were able to have a family life, because when my father got home at 5 o'clock, that was it, it was family time. How many people are in this situation right now, where everyone in the family can be at home after 5 o'clock? And my mother, by the way, didn't work until both I and my sister had left home. That isn't the situation today, at all. So return to the 70s sounds like a pretty damn good idea to me. So the 28,000 days. So up until around about the age of 40 or so, we're still trying to find our way in the world. And then at around about the age of 40, we have an opportunity. Of course, it's dismissed as a crisis. And in the Western society, we have this term called the midlife crisis. Whereas in reality, it's a midlife opportunity. And I would argue that anybody who at 55 is still doing what they were doing at 35 missed that opportunity. But it's an opportunity to reflect on what you've been doing and decide whether or not you want to carry on doing that same thing, whatever that might be, or whether you want to do something completely different. And unfortunately, the economic pressures are so great today that the vast majority of people elect to carry on doing whatever they're doing because they can't see any other alternative. But nonetheless, there is an increasing number of people who are not necessarily changing things in their employment, but they're actually changing things about what they're doing in the hours that they're not in employment. They're taking an interest in what's going on around them as opposed to simply coming home and switching on the TV. Because I'm sure that every one of you is having conversations with random people which you would never have believed possible 10 years ago. Would that be right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah. On the train on the way up, I found a David Icke fan.
One more.
How did you tell?
Well, I was speaking to a woman. She didn't know about anything, about different things, and she was thinking another woman, oh, can I join in on this conversation? And it turned out she was a David Icke fan and knew all the David Icke stuff.
There you go.
And that was on the train.
People having similar experiences? Yeah? You know, whether it's people who maybe you've known for some time, or people like this, you just meet on the train, but you're able to have conversations. And this is a phenomenal change. And this is why the establishment is doing everything it possibly can right now to force people to have to run faster on the treadmill so they don't have the time, even if they have the inclination or the motivation, to actually research and investigate what's really going on. Now, more and more people are starting to understand what's going on, but what they're desperately trying to do now is prevent them from having the time to do anything with that knowledge and with that information. Because they know that more and more people are starting to wake up. CERN. Do you know what this is? Anyone know what this symbol is? Shiva. God of, yeah.
Destruction.
Destruction, exactly. Exactly. So this is Shiva in meditation. And you know, Shiva, yes, is destruction, but of course that's not the full story, is it?